You know how it is, sometimes you just want to grasp the core of something, get the real substance, without getting totally bogged down.
Right, cut through the noise.
Exactly. And that's what we try to do here. Today, we're tackling something, well, pretty interesting, and maybe even a bit surprising for some.
It's this whole discussion within certain Christian circles about recovering and actually using the name Yahweh.
Yeah. And we've got some material here that dives right into the objections, the hesitations people have about this. So if you've ever wondered why some advocate for using this ancient name or why others are resistant,
Then stick around. Our goal here is really just to understand the main sticking points, why people feel uneasy about using Yahweh's name.
we're going to unpack the arguments for this chapter we're looking at, the one that addresses these exact hesitations.
And it's important to say this isn't about us pushing one view. It's about laying out the arguments, the resistance, and the responses given in the text.
Absolutely. So we'll hit the main areas of friction. First, this feeling some get that the whole Yahweh thing seems a little, well, cultish.
That's a big one for some people.
Then we'll dig into the idea that it feels too Jewish and how that makes the Bible, and love feel sort of unfamiliar.
Right. And also the argument that Lord has basically become God's name through long use.
And finally, the big one, perhaps. Is any of this even realistic? Like, practically speaking.
Okay, so let's jump into that first concern, the cultish association.
Where does that come from, according to the text?
Well, the text points out that, unfortunately for some, this emphasis on Yahweh's name can bring to mind certain smaller, maybe more fringe religious groups.
Okay.
It specifically mentions the sacred name movement, the S&M.
Mm-hmm.
This group popped up in the early 20th century, kind of growing out of the Adventist tradition.
Gotcha. So what defined them? What were their key characteristics, according to our source?
The text describes them as really trying hard to align Christianity with its Hebrew roots.
Okay, so going back to origins.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about names. It meant, for them, adopting practices like observing Old Testament laws, the Sabbath, Torah festivals, keeping kosher, that sort of thing. And often they held different theological views, too, like rejecting the Trinity or seeing Christmas and Easter as having pagan origins.
Right, so quite a few things that diverge from, let's say, mainstream Christian belief and practice.
Definitely. And it sounds like the author we're drawing from isn't exactly a fan of the S&M.
No, not at all. The author is pretty blunt, actually, calls their approach cringy and legalistic at best.
Wow, okay.
And potentially unbiblical and cultic. It even connects it to the early church's arguments against the Judaizers, those who wanted Gentiles to follow the Old Covenant laws.
Right, that's a strong comparison. So how did this S&M group handle the Bible, specifically the name of God?
They created what they called sacred name Bibles.
Okay.
And the main point of these was to insert Yahweh's name, usually transliterated, into the Old Testament.
Makes sense, given their focus.
But they often went further. They'd swap out Lord for Yahweh, even when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament.
Ah, even in the quotes.
Yeah, or anywhere they figured the original Hebrew might have used the name. And many also use Yeshua instead of Jesus.
Okay, so you can see how, on the surface, someone advocating for using Yahweh today might get lumped in with them, right? That association risk.
Exactly. That's the potential problem the text flags. It uses this analogy, like think about flags. Pirates fly flags, patriots fly flags.
But the flag itself doesn't tell the whole story.
Right. You need to look deeper. The text even quotes someone named Andrew Case, who points out this cultish association can actually stop people from even properly considering passages like Exodus 3.15.
Which is kind of central to the whole argument for using the name.
Yeah. And the author of our source material, they really want to distance themselves from the S&M.
How so?
They state very clearly that they see themselves as one of its harshest critics.
Okay, strong words.
Because they argue, the S&M's history and theology are a liability to the whole discussion about recovering Yahweh's name.
Got it. So, clearing the air on that association.
And the text uses another angle, too, bringing up history. It talks about how early Christians faced some wild accusations.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like cannibalism and incest. Seriously.
Whoa! Where did that come from?
Misunderstandings, partly. Misinterpreting things like calling each other brother and sister or the symbolism of the Lord's Supper.
I see.
And it didn't help that they sometimes got confused with actual Gnostic groups who did have some pretty strange practices.
Right. So the point is, just because some fringe group uses a term or practice doesn't automatically make it bad.
Precisely. We didn't stop calling each other brother and sister because of those false accusations back then.
Makes sense.
So the core message here is, Don't let the fear of false association make you discard what the text calls the treasure, calling God by his personal name, like Exodus 3.15 says.
Okay, that tackles the cultish concern pretty thoroughly. What about the next one? That using Yahweh feels, well, too Jewish.
Yeah, this one's related but a bit different. Sometimes it stems from the S&M focus we just talked about, but often it's just...
A general feeling of unfamiliarity, things feeling foreign.
Exactly. It's natural to be a bit wary of things outside our cultural norm, and faith does change as it crosses cultures.
The text has a great example of that, actually, the name James.
Oh, yeah. How so?
It traces it back from the Hebrew Yaakov, then it went into Greek, then Latin, then Old French.
And eventually landed in English as James. Completely different sound.
Totally different. It shows how names themselves can transform culturally and linguistically over time.
So some adaptation is normal, but the text argues that some things are too important, too fundamental in meaning, to change like that.
And it puts Yahweh's name firmly in that essential meaning category.
Right, unlike, say, the exact length of a cubit, which is interesting, but maybe not core doctrine.
Yahweh's personal name, appearing, nearly 7,000 times? That carries a weight the text says shouldn't be lost.
And it acknowledges the name is Jewish. That's its origin.
Which creates that kind of double whammy of unfamiliarity the text mentions.
Explain that.
Well, first, it's just different from Lord, which we're all used to hearing. Second, it sounds foreign, it sounds Jewish to Western ears.
And that can create discomfort.
Understandably. But the text really pushes back on that, saying the Jewishness of God and his name shouldn't be a barrier.
I mean, Jesus himself was Jewish.
Exactly. A Jewish man with a Jewish name, Yeshua, which the text points out, means Yahweh saves. That's pretty significant.
It also mentions Philippians 2 in this context.
Yeah, about Jesus' exaltation and every knee bowing to his name. The text warns against this sort of subtle tendency to, un-Jewish God or the Bible.
Like trying to strip away the historical context.
Yeah, which can inadvertently lose important meaning, almost like some Gnostic ideas tried to do.
So it's a balance. Contextualize where helpful and necessary, but don't change essentials like God's own revealed name.
Right. The text uses another example. We wouldn't just replace Abraham with a generic title like the patriarch, would we?
No, because Abraham is his name, given by God even, carrying specific meaning and relationship.
Precisely. Names matter, especially divinely given ones. So the text concludes this bit by saying, look, the problem isn't really Yahweh's name. The problem is our unfamiliarity.
Okay, and it reassures you, the listener, that this doesn't mean you suddenly need to adopt Jewish cultural practices, right?
Right. No yarmulkes required. No need to affect a Hebrew accent. It's about understanding and embracing the Jewish roots of our faith within our own cultural ways of expressing it.
That clarifies things, which leads smoothly into the next objection. Using Yahweh makes my Bible feel, well, weird, unfamiliar.
Yeah, this is close to home for a lot of people. It's about that deep emotional connection to the words we've always known.
The text uses a really striking analogy here.
The husband and wife one.
Yeah. Imagine being married for 34 years, always calling your wife Joanne.
And then finding out her actual given name is Esperanza.
Oh, yeah, that would be jarring. All those years, all those memories tied to Joanne.
Exactly. It captures that deep-seated familiarity. The text even mentions Vadi Baucham's initial reaction to the Legacy Standard Bible using Yahweh God.
What did he say?
He apparently admitted finding it off-putting at first, just because it was different.
But he came around to appreciate the accuracy later.
That's the point. The text acknowledges this can be a real mental, even emotional hurdle for believers. It's not easy.
It's not dismissing the difficulty.
Not at all. But it argues that some changes, even the difficult ones, are worth it if they're necessary and valuable.
It compares it to switching Bible translations, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you know the meaning hasn't changed, reading a familiar verse in new words can feel awkward initially, right?
Totally. Takes time to get used to it, both personally and in church services.
So the point remains. Difficult changes can be worthwhile changes.
Okay. Objection 7. This is the argument that, hey, we've been using the Lord for so long, it's functionally become his name.
The text tackles this one pretty head-on.
What's the response?
Simple and direct. A title cannot replace a personal name.
Just fundamentally, they're different categories of words.
Right. And the text is clear. Using titles like Father or the Lord is perfectly fine and appropriate, especially when the Hebrew original is a title like Adonai.
Okay, so it's not saying never use Lord.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But substituting a title for God's actual revealed personal name, Yahweh, almost 7,000 times.
That's inaccurate, the text argues, no matter how used to it we've become.
Precisely. Familiarity doesn't equal accuracy in this case.
Got it. All right, that brings us to the final objection, which the text suggests might be the biggest elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Is this whole idea even realistic?
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road, practically speaking.
The text suggests this concern about feasibility, often framed as concern for believers' well-being, not wanting to cause disruption or pain.
Might be the real underlying reason why major translations haven't used Yahweh's name.
And the scale of change would be massive, wouldn't it?
Huge. Think about it. Millions of Christians adjusting their vocabulary, their mental framework. Church leaders, seminaries, publishers, songwriters, authors, everyone would need to recalibrate.
It's a daunting prospect.
So the core question becomes, is recovering Yahweh's name important enough to justify that level of effort and cost?
The text mentions the NIV committee's reasoning.
Yeah, Edwin Palmer's explanation. He talked about the financial risks for publishers and, frankly, wanting to stick close to the King James tradition to ensure wider acceptance.
So pragmatic concerns definitely played a major role.
Seems so. But the author of our source has a different objective.
Which is?
To build such a strong case that recovering Yahweh's name is seen as a necessity, not just a nice idea or a preference.
To convince people it needs to happen, regardless of the difficulty.
Right. The goal is persuasion on the grounds of importance and biblical mandate.
And it uses a biblical example to illustrate this kind of conviction leading to difficult action.
Yeah, Ezra chapter 10. When the Israelites realized they'd disobeyed God by marrying foreign women.
They didn't just say, oh, well, too complicated to fix now.
Exactly. They recognized God's will and asked, okay, how do we do this, even though it involved immense personal and social upheaval?
It's about shifting from, is it feasible, to, how do we obey? One's convinced.
That's the idea, though the text is careful not to equate the situations directly, just using it as an example of conviction driving action.
But even with that conviction, the text is realistic about the odds of widespread change happening soon.
Oh yeah, very realistic. It flat out says widespread adoption is very unlikely.
Why so pessimistic?
Just looking at history, this isn't a new issue, and the tradition of substitution is deeply, deeply ingrained. Centuries of it.
That's pretty sobering. But then, there's a but, isn't there?
There is, a crucial one. Despite the unlikelihood from a human standpoint, the text insists it's still possible. Because, and this is a direct quote, sometimes God decides to do a thing.
Shifting the focus from human effort to divine action.
Exactly. It points to huge, unexpected moments in biblical history. Israel's rescue from Egypt.
Against all odds.
The birth of Christ after centuries of waiting.
Seemingly impossible.
The return from exile under Cyrus, which was prophesied but still stunning when it happened.
These were things only God could orchestrate.
That's the point. So the text brings it back. Is recovering Yahweh's name right?
Yes.
Is it needed? Yes. Is widespread adoption likely by human means? Probably not.
But is God able?
Yes. And is now the time he might choose to act? That's the open question. It quotes Romans and Isaiah about God's ways being beyond ours.
So it's not about predicting success based on our plans, but hoping in God's sovereignty.
Precisely. It even brings in Gamaliel's advice from Acts. If it's from God, you can't stop it. If it's not, it'll fail.
And it sees the recent publication of the Legacy Standard Bible, which does use Yahweh as maybe a sign.
A marvelous window of opportunity is how the text puts it. Maybe a hint that.
Sometimes Yahweh decides to do a thing.
That's the concluding thought for that section.
Wow. Okay, that's a powerful way to frame it. Acknowledging the mountain-sized practical issues, but keeping the door open for God's intervention.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground there, hitting those key objections people raise.
For sure. The cultish fear, the too Jewish feeling, the unfamiliarity, the Lord His name argument, and this huge question of realism.
So, after hearing all that, the question the text implicitly leaves hanging for you, the listener, is, are you persuaded?
Yeah. Does the case for necessity outweigh the obstacles? And our source material does hint there's more discussion in a section called The Way Forward.
Right. But just dwelling on what we've covered, it leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? Building on that God can do anything theme.
What if? What if individuals, what if communities started acting on the possibility that this is important? That using Yahweh's name is right, even if mass change seems unlikely right now.
What might happen then? It's definitely something to mull over.